Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you, Tim. So good to be here. James O'Brien, president of Custom, the in-house agency here at Digiday Media. And what a fascinating conversation. I learn so much every time I listen to Tim and his guests. Comprehensive is the word. And a lot of things that they touched upon are things that allow us to tee up our next conversation, which is going to be with our sponsor, Mountain. We're going to be talking about connected TV. Connected TV is a topic that the Custom team here at Digiday has been working on with Mountain and with QuickFrame by Mountain for a couple of years now, Mountain in particular. And it has changed CTV, has changed the advertising conversation completely. It has opened up access and unlocked ways of approaching performance that are relatively new, at least in this environment. And this will be the topic of our conversation today. We're going to dig into how platforms in the CTV space can protect ad budgets, especially during these economic times, which Tim and Barad touched upon. We'll talk about some insider strategies to maximize the potential of CTV in the marketing mix. So without further ado, let me welcome our next guest to the screen, to the show. Please welcome Matt Collins, who is the Director of Product Marketing at Mountain. Matt, welcome.
James, good to see you again.
Good to see you again. We had a chance to chat yesterday a bit, and I'm excited about the things that you're thinking about. Let's dive right in. So we have been talking about CTV in our channels for some time, but the channel itself, TV, has been around a lot longer. And it's been associated for much of that time with high impact messaging. And that messaging is an audiovisual messaging. It's storytelling messaging. And in the pre-streaming world, in the pre-CTV world, there's been a received or an assumed, I think it's safe to say, lack of measurement and targeting in a sophisticated way that has at times perhaps been thought of as a kind of Achilles heel. That may or may not be fair. Matt, take us in. How is connected TV, as we're working with it in 2022, changing that long-held assumption or dynamic?
Yeah, James, great question. And there are two dynamics really that you uncovered. The first, I would say, is the dynamic around television, as you point out, is an 8-decade-long canvas for brands to tell their stories. The second dynamic, which you talked about, is the perceived gaps in the platform's ability to deliver effective both audience targeting and measurement. And I think driving both of those changes for CTV is its common, what I refer to as plumbing and wiring that it shares with paid search and social. And that delivers a degree of precision, both on the audience targeting and measurement side, that has long eluded not just traditional television, but any offline channel. So as a result, getting back to the question about these changing dynamics, marketers can and should, by the way, continue to use CTV as they have television advertising for the purposes of building great, durable brands. Use that big canvas for the sight, sound, emotion of television to pull viewers in and tell your best story. That does not change. What does change is the opportunity to use CTV to produce a lower funnel outcome. And by that, I mean website visit or mobile application usage. In other words, driving audience volume into your conversion engine, which I've heard, I can't take credit for that term, but a friend of mine uses it all the time to describe the digital apparatus that exists these days that marketers create to harvest the demand that they generate. And ultimately drive it down to sales, to product sales. And I think about one of the historical challenges of measurement of any offline medium, but I think more broadly marketing generally, is our tendency over the years to seek out proxies for outcomes, proxies for the kinds of things, James, that you would confidently walk into the office of the CFO and talk about having produced with your marketing budget. And good examples of this are all around, but I'll pick a couple. hey boss, I got us this many impressions, or I generated this many GRPs as a result of that money that we got, or I was able to reach this percentage of my audience with this level of frequency. And I think there's a presumption underlying all of that, those metrics count for or stand in for an outcome. But I've had those conversations with CFOs and CEOs, and they look at that and go, okay, and the good news is that CTV bridges that gap. If you do it correctly, there's really nothing like saying, when we ran this campaign, we saw X change in terms of our site traffic, which translated into Y change in terms of revenue. But it requires doing it the right way.
It goes to the heart of the word performance. And that is one of the key concepts that have emerged in the time that we've been working together, and in the time that most of us have been reading and learning about connected TV and what it's doing, its part in that conversion engine, which I think is fantastic. Who doesn't want one of those? The thing is that brands of different sizes, small brands, mid-sized brands, the growth brand, they have, going back to that long-held kind of system again for a moment, they have often associated TV advertising with something that's out of reach, and maybe because it's somewhat out of reach in terms of cost and what's needed to plug into it and make creative for it, not necessarily a strategic priority. But I think it's pretty clear that that's in a state of change. That brands of those sizes, the smaller brands, the mid-sized brands, are now reapproaching, let's say, TV overall as something but CTV as a vector to TV. So is it the truth? Is it correct to say that CTV has become differently accessible, more accessible to those types of advertisers in particular?
Yes. The very short answer is yes. We're seeing it right and left. CTV has democratized access to the biggest screen in the house. And it's doing that. Brands of all shapes and sizes are seeking it out because it brings certain inherent advantages around audience precision, efficiency and speed, and the transparency and confidence in the outcomes that you can measure coming out of it. And all of these things are really sort of changing the game when it comes to opening up that access. So Mountain is one of a handful of providers that I'm sure are having a front row seat at this change that's unfolding. But we see, just to pick a few examples, local brands who are coming in to drive more foot traffic to their franchisees or to regional or local retail locations. We are seeing mid-sized brands who have never run television before jumping in and showing up for all the world like they're one of the big incumbents that have been in television for decades. And then you also have, interestingly, big incumbents who are getting into CTV, not just to follow a linear audience, a traditional linear TV audience that's shrinking, but to launch new initiatives in an effort to acquire first-party data or to stand up a direct-to-consumer line of business. They're using CTV to take advantage of its many benefits, which I'll get into here in a second. But the result is that you have a much bigger pool available of advertisers who are coming into the space and recognizing that there's room in that great big tent for them. And by the way, their impressions of the traditional linear TV market are not wrong. The price of entry there, both in terms of media cost, creative cost, and just sort of piercing the oligopoly required to get into that, having an agency to work with and dealing with a relatively small audience of media sellers who are at the same time very powerful. All of those things have conspired to make it hard. CTV is breaking all that down. So when we get into the reasons why, really I think there are three. The first is the ability to reach precision audiences at scale, the ability to, for a marketer to graduate beyond an age gender demo and really embrace a strategic audience target, the kind of target that marketers routinely jot down on a brief, a creative brief. I want to reach yoga lovers who are into health food. That's not a demo that you're going to be able to buy through traditional linear TV buyers, but you can do it on CTV. And it goes beyond that. You can also target and retarget first-party audiences or audiences based on CRM. You can reach audiences or exclude audiences based on their intent signals, whether they visited your website or not. So the audience precision cuts out one of the big headwinds facing linear TV for many years, which is the concept of what traditional TV buyers have referred to as spill. But some refer to that as just wasted impressions, serving your ad to people who are outside of your target. CTV minimizes the likelihood of that happening. The second factor that's driving this, as we talked about a moment ago, James, is the measurement precision and the ability to associate your ad running with an outcome that is unambiguous to the CFO, not just your CMO. That's big. I won't go over that again, but that's a significant driver. I think the third, not to be overlooked in all of this, is a revolution that's happening in the world of creative. And creative has been a barrier. It's been expensive. It's not just a perception. It has been expensive to build a living room quality TV experience. But that barrier is coming down as more and more options become available, both in terms of the kind of creativity that really works in the living room. Doesn't have to be live action, can be animation. It can be, the assembly of still photography with great music and sound, voiceover. And an explosion in just the sheer volume of providers who will be happy to work with you to give you more variety of ads at a lower cost with greater velocity, all of which opens up for the performance marketers listening to this. All of that should be triggering, hey, what about the A/B testing that I can now do with this? So it really has become this great big expanding force in bringing more marketers into what has always been one of the most powerful drivers of outcomes that you can get in any form of media.
I mean, we've invoked the letters CFO and CMO a couple times in the past hour or so between Tim's conversation and this one, and I think that it's one of those days when the idea of economic uncertainty really comes home in the world of marketing in particular. So let's talk about that for a minute. Tim had mentioned during his segment preceding, that conversation between the CFO and the CMO. I'm looking at your budget, the CFO says, and need you to make some choices here about how we're going to go to market, which channels and formats. Marketing teams then, know that tightening the belt is a cyclical certainty, and they know that ad dollars need to be reallocated and budgets need to be addressed. Returns are under higher scrutiny when these things are happening to us. What are you seeing, Matt? You spend a lot of time with Mountain Partners, but also as a person looking at the world of CTV advertising in general. How is what we're going through these past several months and what look like will be the next several months, at least, of our lives, impacting approaches to the marketing mix when it comes to CTV? What's happening to CTV because of economic uncertainty right now?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I would start with just sort of a broader observation about the effects of uncertainty, which I think is actually more pronounced than the actual hard economics at this point. I think that a lot of the C-suite in companies who have things to sell are, I imagine, mostly trying to come up with different scenarios that will protect them regardless of what transpires over the next 3 to 12 months. And so this spans all forms of media investment. And what's interesting to me, I'll just tell you some of the things that stand out to me. What's interesting to me is that you've seen over the last couple of weeks some caution that's been expressed by some of the publicly traded digital ad platforms about slowing growth. But at the same time, some agencies have come forward to say that their clients are still spending. What they're asking for from their agency partners is flexibility. They want to make sure that their options are protected in case things go sideways or in case things change in a way that would require undoing plans that may have been made well in advance. So that's been interesting to me. I'd argue that, and this is not a hot take by any stretch, but over the last, say, 3 weeks, I would say it's probably been the worst stretch for social media platforms in the young history of that segment. Marketers and brands and agencies have been pausing spends in some pretty high profile ways, while at the same time you have some major retrenching that's going on the workforce side for some of these businesses. So that's all sort of creating some uncertainty. If we look back, I guess, to very recent history, James, we go back to the last time we had a slowdown or the prospect of a slowdown. It's actually sort of a stomping on the brakes rather than a slowdown. If we think back to Q2 and Q3 of 2020, when COVID lockdowns were really exerting themselves, that's probably as recent an example as we can conjure here for like what will happen, what's going to happen next, what's happening now. And back then, I remember asking this question to a lot of people who had been in marketing for a heck of a lot longer than I. What happens when we get this slowdown? What happened in the Great Depression? What happened in the stagflation times of the 1970s and the recessionary times of the early 1980s? And what came through loudly was, hey, the brands that continued to spend on advertising outperformed in the long run those that went quiet. The question that we ask ourselves in today's environment is, well, how should you spend it? If we should keep the spigots on, do we spend it on brand or do we spend it on performance? And I think the question got answered in Q2 and Q3 of 2020 that CFOs and CEOs were okay or more okay keeping the spigots on as long as they knew that those spigots were being directed towards channels that they could get a measurable read on, that they were accountable. And things that were less accountable, I think, were a bit more vulnerable to being cut either entirely or a bit. And that would include what I know a lot of marketers talk about as sort of shiny object pursuits, things that are interesting as experiments, but maybe ways away from scaling and delivering meaningful volume to the business. So I think that, my opinion here is that we are headed towards some economic wobbliness. That's not a hot take. I think that in that environment, we are going to see CFOs and CEOs take out the same playbook they ran in 2020, which is to go to their CMOs and other teams and say, I really need you to show for me the investments that you're making that create a direct line of sight to revenue. And those that don't are going to be revisited and scrutinized, maybe cut back. Those that do will be counted on even more. The good news, to get back to your question about, where does CTV fit in all this? I think for many advertisers over the last 5 to 7 years, CTV has been the place to just get incremental marginal reach and drive more and more audience as it's been migrating off of the platform, off of linear. Nowadays, it can be used for performance, as I mentioned. It is an ideal off-ramp in that sense for brands right now who might be paused on a platform out of any number of different concerns, might be looking to exercise options that they held from the upfronts and that they want to hold back because those are under delivering, or might be looking for brand safety and data privacy safety. So for all those reasons, look, CTV is going to continue to draw audience. It's going to continue to grow. And advertisers can use it for so much more. So I do think that in the grand scheme of things, CTV is going to be a safer haven.
Matt, what a wealth of ideas and tactics and sort of strategy tips that you've just given. I was gonna ask you next to take us into some of the things that what do you do about this? How do you maximize this spend that you're going to get because you can tie to performance. But the things that you've just said really unpack a whole lot of those steps that a team that knows it's now got the performance, it can stay on the line, it can help ride out those economic uncertainties to some extent by leaning into the measurable factors that come with CTV. That I think that is the playbook that if I were a CTV team marketer right now, I'd be taking away. I wish we could stay on and talk for a lot longer. You have a lot in your head about this that I know is valuable, but I also know we'll be back at some point in the near future with something that we're doing together over the course of the top of 2023 and the end of this year, because we have a lot of reports, articles, podcasts, and other things that we're doing together to come, Mountain and Custom. So may I please thank you one more time, Matt, for joining us. Matt Collins, Director of Product Marketing at Mountain, has been with us. We are at the Future of TV Advertising Forum. Matt, until next time, thank you.
Thanks, James.
So I'm James O'Brien, President of Custom, the in-house agency here at Digiday Media. It is my pleasure to bring you back to your host, the Senior Media Editor here at Digiday. Mr. Tim Peterson will take us into the rest of the afternoon. Take it away, Tim.